Right now, the United States and Russia are holding secret negotiations in Abu Dhabi to agree on a peace plan for the war in Ukraine, after the United States delegation met with the Ukrainians in Geneva. But notably, the head of Ukrainian intelligence, Budanov, is also taking part in these negotiations, which are taking place in the United Arab Emirates. Moreover, according to Axios, he is in contact with both the Americans and the Russians to discuss sensitive issues. The main negotiator from the United States is Army Secretary Dan Driscoll, who came to Kyiv to meet with Zelensky. Driscoll gave the Russian delegation the revised document, updated in Geneva over the weekend to include Ukrainian proposals. Also, the White House confirmed this information just minutes ago. These proposals concern the fact that Ukraine does not accept any restrictions on the size of its army, does not give up Donbass, and does not agree to amnesty for Russia. But what's interesting is that, according to sources, right now in Abu Dhabi is also the head of the main intelligence directorate of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, Budanov, who is negotiating with Driscoll. Whether Budanov is in direct contact with the Russian side was initially said to be unknown. But it's worth noting that Budanov and Gurmo maintained one of the few open channels of communication with Russia throughout the entire war, which allowed for prisoner exchanges and discussions of other issues. And now the White House has officially stated that yes, there are indeed Ukrainian representatives in Abu Dhabi, and negotiations are essentially taking place between three parties to discuss very sensitive and delicate issues. At the same time, NATO's Supreme Commander in Europe, General Alexus Grinkevich, went to Brussels to inform the allies. Meanwhile, the European allies themselves are gathering for an emergency meeting to discuss the progress of the negotiations, security guarantees, and new military aid to Ukraine. So, let's talk in more detail about all these negotiations. I'm Pechiy, let's discuss this together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave any comment under this episode. Subscribe to my Telegram channel Pechiy News, link in the video description. There we publish breaking news as it comes in. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so financially with any donation or a paid sponsorship subscription using the links and details in the description of this video. So, several Western media outlets are reporting that on Tuesday, United States Army Minister Driscoll met with Russian officials in Abu Dhabi regarding a peace plan to end the war in Ukraine. This is a rare meeting between the top military leaders of the countries, and a meeting in which State Deputy Secretary Marco Rubio and other American negotiators, such as Witkoff or Kushner, will not participate. According to a high-ranking United States official, the United States Army leader is conveying to the Russians the peace framework agreed upon on Sunday between the United States and Ukraine. As reported by Politico, the meeting marks a significant step in the Trump administration's latest effort to end the war. Driscoll is presenting the Russians with a plan that reduces the original 28-point United States peace plan to about 19 points, after changing Ukraine's demands for Ukraine to cede Donbass to Russia and other delicate issues related to Ukrainian territory. These issues were supposedly left for discussion by United States President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Later, the United States State Department stated, quote, "The entire team of President Trump, including Secretary Rubio, Special Envoy Witkoff, and many others, has been working for 10 months to put an end to the senseless and destructive war. And that's how they decided to respond to journalists' questions about how the negotiations with the Russians in the Emirates are going. Well, in the White House, they simply made a statement, quote, President Trump appreciates Minister Driscoll's efforts to gather information from both the Russians and the Ukrainians in order to develop an agreement and ensure a lasting and enforceable peace. Well, that's basically all the answers, but as you know, it's hard to hide anything from journalists or keep anything secret. And the fact that Driscoll is negotiating with the Russians in Abu Dhabi is already more than well known. And that's why a little later the White House finally admitted it and said, yes, indeed, negotiations are taking place in the Emirates. And indeed, not only Americans and Russians are taking part there, but also representatives of Ukraine and others, in order to discuss delicate but insurmountable details. This is a statement from Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary. Well, when the avalanche of requests had already started. It is reported that Driscoll landed in Abu Dhabi on Monday evening. He spent part of last week in Kiev, where he met with Zelensky and dozens of European ambassadors before joining Mark Rubio and others in Geneva to meet with European leaders. Rubio and Trump's Ukraine negotiator Steve Witkoff have returned to Washington. Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law and another negotiator, has also returned to the United States. Meanwhile, Supreme Commander of NATO allies Alexus Grinkevich went to Brussels to brief NATO allies. Well, Drizkala was sent to the Russians in Abu Dhabi. At the same time, the Financial Times kind of adds to the picture. The agency writes that behind the scenes of the negotiations between United States Army Minister Drizkala and the Russians is the head of the main intelligence directorate of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, Kirill Budanov. The Financial Times reports talks with Moscow representatives started Monday evening, November 24, and continue today. It is not specified who exactly came from the Kremlin. Sources say Drizkal is reportedly holding separate meetings with Budanov and the Russians, but it's unclear if a trilateral discussion will occur. But the Financial Times reminds us that it was Kirill Budanov and Gurmo. Supported. One of the few open channels of communication with Russia throughout the entire war, which allowed for prisoner exchanges and discussions of other issues. And now Axios reports that Budanov is negotiating directly with both the Americans and the Russians. Meanwhile, in Moscow, they continue to put on a show and they claim that they received the American peace plan through unofficial channels. The document allegedly contains 28 points and Russia has not received any other versions of it. The Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, as always, accused Western countries of trying, as he put it, to distort President Donald Trump's plan and undermine his efforts to resolve the war. Naturally, the Russians began threatening. Lavrov claims that the situation could change if the agreements reached at the summit in Anchorage between Trump and the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin are removed from the document. According to Lavrov, Moscow is supposedly ready to discuss specific wording, but, quote, insists on preserving the spirit and letter of the agreements that were recorded in Alaska. Otherwise, Lavrov states, the situation will be fundamentally different. So, Lavrov is hinting that if Ukraine and Europe do not accept their peace plan, the war will continue. The plan has changed. Drizkal is presenting the plan of United States President Donald Trump, which was reduced from 28 to 19 points after negotiations with the Ukrainians in Geneva. The demands to hand over Donbas to Russia and other sensitive territorial provisions were removed from it. And according to American broadcasting company News, the new version also does not include provisions on limiting the size of the Ukrainian army or on amnesty for actions. Earlier, sources from the Washington Post reported that the plan also removed points about United States-Russian relations that are not directly related to the process of ending the war in Ukraine. This is an interesting point because the Russians tried to link their possible future trade, business, diplomatic and political relations with the Americans to the fact of ending the war against Ukraine. And according to the publications, Kyiv also insisted that the issue of NATO membership be considered within the procedures of the alliance itself, that is, by consensus of the member countries. Bloomberg adds and writes that the new version also removed the point about allocating $100 billion from frozen Russian assets to create a Ukraine recovery fund under American control. European officials viewed this change positively, since the previous version provided for transferring 50% of the profits to the United States and directing unspent funds, another $200 billion, into a certain American-Russian investment fund. Well, here we are waiting for the results of the negotiations between the United States and Russia, because next there should be a meeting between Trump and Zelensky, where they might finalize all the terms of the peace agreement. But as we can see, the Russians are already pretending that they are not ready to make any concessions, and obviously they will most likely try to stall for time again. Because they were really counting on this plan being pushed through aggressively, with deadlines set for Zelensky, thinking he would get scared and sign, but that didn't happen. So I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.